Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my predictions for the Western Region Play-In Tournament. Once again, there's no pick'ems for this. I don't know why they have not done pick'ems for the play-in brackets, but I have made my own little graphics. You guys can see it, but let's just start with a look at the normal bracket. You can see it here. These are the matches we have round one. We have Boston taking on Florida. Florida is the highest seed in the play-in tournament, the seventh seed in the Western region. And then you have Washington versus Toronto. That is the matchup of the 9-seeded Washington versus the 8-seeded Toronto. So those are your brackets. Those are your matchups, round one. So let's start with Boston versus Florida. Interesting matchup between these two teams. They last faced off in the first weekend of the Countdown Cup qualifiers. It was a 3-0 victory for the Boston Uprising. Now, I think that since then, the Florida men have looked a lot better. They have looked way more comfortable as this meta has progressed. The Boston Uprising have not looked as good, though this past weekend they did have a good weekend with wins over New York and Paris. Not great opponents, obviously, but wins nonetheless that I think are good for this Uprising team. Florida with wins last weekend over both Toronto and Houston. Good wins for them, putting themselves in a really good position going to play-ins. And I think they probably are the favorites right now coming out of this Western Region play-in. However, they first have to beat Boston, a team who they lost to a couple of weeks ago. So do I think Florida has what it takes to bounce back and get the win this time around where they lost last time around? My short answer is yes. I think Florida has improved a lot since that first matchup with Boston. I think they just look like a better team so far. And I think that it's kind of unlikely that they lose to the Uprising this time around, when I think that the Uprising don't look as good as they did. Not that they look bad, they just don't look as good. And so I think Florida should take this one and move on to the upper bracket finals, the, I guess, first playoff qualification match here. I think the Uprising dropped down to the lower bracket. Washington versus Toronto, these two teams in interesting places. I think that these are two teams that I would say that most likely one of these two teams will also get in. I just don't know which one, just by looking at it. Toronto has struggled a bit. They've had some pretty weak games. They did beat Houston last week, but like I've talked about in my recaps and in my picks, how much is Houston really trying last week when their playoff spot was already locked in? They didn't really have to fight for that, anything like that. That was the biggest question in regards to the Houston Outlaws. So a good win for Toronto, but outside of that, they've had some pretty rough games. They did beat the Shock, but they also lost to New York. While on the other side, Washington beat both the Shock and New York. So both of these teams have a very similar path to get to this point in this tournament cycle. And so I think this one's going to go the distance. It's going to be very, very close. The meta has changed over time. In theory, to one that Kalios should be pretty good at. He did favor a lot of Orisa when not a lot of other teams did, which is interesting. But it is a lot of Diva, a lot of Zarya, something that in theory Kalios should be pretty good at. But also Hotba's pretty good at those heroes for Toronto as well. I think it's going to come down to kind of where those teams differ in terms of talent, because I think really, in a lot of ways, the level of comfort isn't really any different between these teams. It's just a matter of who has the better players. And as a whole, I think Toronto just has a slightly better roster, so I am picking the Toronto Defiant 3-2 over the Justice in this one. That moves Toronto to the upper bracket finals with Florida, while it moves the Washington Justice down to play the Boston Uprising. So let's talk about Washington versus Boston. These two teams played recently as well, and it was a win for the Washington Justice. I believe it was a 3-2 win for the Justice. So pretty close, but ultimately went the way of the Justice. I would expect another matchup between these two teams to be close once again. I don't really feel great about either team right now. Boston had a really high at the beginning of the Countdown Cup that kind of slowed down week 2, where I think they should have been favored to beat Florida, but they didn't. And then they played, the Gladiators, which okay, that's fine. They did beat New York, and they did beat Paris, which are games that they should have won, so it's good that they did, but I haven't really been super impressed by them since that win over Houston in the first weekend. Washington, they had the big win against Shock, which I think was the biggest win for them so far, and I think you have to give them a lot of credit for that one. I think you have to look at that one as a really big game for them. They won the last time they played. I think both these teams are pretty close, but I think the Justice have done more, and I think that if I had to expect one of these teams to win, I would expect it to be the Washington Justice, so I'm going to say the Justice take this one 3-2 over Boston. Florida and Toronto, I think Florida should win this one. They just played last week, and Florida dominated Toronto. I don't think that'll change this week. Has not been enough time for that to really be a big difference, so I think Florida's got this one in the bag. I think they're going to win this one 3-1, I'll say, just for the sake of it. Florida then locking up a playoff spot, and the final match of the tournament would be the Toronto Defiant taking on the Washington Justice. Another interesting one that we would have already had once in this tournament, so it wouldn't be a new matchup per se, but it would be at least be another kind of rematch they would have played again, which is kind of interesting to see. And this one, once again, could go either way, but I'm going to once again give it to the Toronto Defiant because I think they've just looked better as a whole. They've been more consistent. This could easily go either way. I think that either one of these teams could win both of these. You know, they could split it. Washington could go 2-0. Toronto could go 2-0. It's really, really close. It's not that far apart. It's not that big a deal to say, oh, this person looks better, this person looks better. Right now, I would just pick Toronto. I think they've played better and they look better. They're my pick to win this one. So those are all the games this weekend. That's it for the games. This would be my picks. I'll throw my bracket up so you can kind of see it. This was made by me, so if it looks a little scuffed, I apologize. But there you go. Florida and Toronto qualifying as the final two teams for the playoffs. We'll talk on Monday about what the actual playoffs will be, the actual bracket and whatnot, and we'll take a look at that, which is always nice to see. But that is really all I have for you today. Short one, not a lot going on this weekend, but hope that these matches are good and at least are meaningful, so they'll be fun to watch. That's it. Hope you all enjoyed. If you want more content like this in the future, consider liking and subscribing, as it does help out a bunch. And comment down below who you think is going to make it into the playoffs from this Western Region play-in. So that is all. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all once again for watching. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.